Welcome to the Circularity Edge podcast, where we discuss the latest news and perspectives on the circular economy and issues relating to social, environmental, and economic sustainability. Join us every week when we discuss what's needed to create a sustainable circular economy worldwide. Now, here is your host, Ken Alston.
Hello, this is Ken Alston with the Circularity Edge podcast, and today I have with me Len Laycock. He's the founder of Horizontal. On the website, it describes Horizontal as a bed, in fact, a new bed for a changed earth. Well, welcome to the Circularity Edge podcast, Len.
Well, nice to be with you, Ken.
So, first of all, tell us something about the startup of Horizontal. What motivated you to design a new bed? And then we'll get into a little bit about what it is and how different it is.
Well, I'll try and make a long story short. About 25 years ago, I started reading so much about climate change. And I would also read at the same time a lot of stories that were debunking it. And I was reading both types of stories in what I thought were credible publications in Canada, like the Globe and Mail, for example, or in the United States, the New York Times. And I wondered what the hell is going on, because these things couldn't be reconciled. So I started my own journey of investigation, and that's been an ongoing thing all of these years. And I had a moment in the early 2000s where on a February day, this is Vancouver, where we have the mildest climate in Canada. And it was an unusually pleasant February day. And I decided to wash the car at the back of the house. And my son, who's a man now, was a young boy at that time. And he was kind of playing around and maybe helping me a bit. And he told me that he was concerned about, climate and maybe the world might end, as a child would do. And of course, it cut me right in my heart. And,
right, in a very innocent and yet very direct way, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And so I resolved to start doing things, and I did in the work I was doing at that time. And I was in the furniture business then. I have a long background in the furniture business. I was the marketing director for IKEA Canada, and I also helped IKEA launch in the United States in the Philadelphia area in Plymouth Meeting. So I've done work with them nationally and internationally in Europe and Scandinavia. And so, I designed this bed, and I started thinking that, I know the problems with bedding because, I don't have any particular expertise about the energy industry. So I'm not the guy to come to for solar solutions or wind power or geothermal, but I know a lot about furniture marketing and what goes into furniture. And when I look at beds, they're to the 96-97% level, they're made from polyurethane foam. Polyurethane foam is made from oil turned into petrochemicals and then turned into foam. And it has a lot of nasty stuff in it. And human beings in the Western world are spending 1/3 of their entire time that they live on the planet lying on polyurethane foam with all of these chemicals, without even mentioning the fire retardants. And that's a long-term exposure. If you're 8 hours a night on polyurethane foam all your life, that is a long-term exposure to these chemicals.
Right.
In about 1980, state of California identified a chemical called TDI, toluene diisocyanate, as a carcinogen.
One of the two main components for making foams, yeah.
Yes, I see you're well aware. And in fact, you can't
I'm a chemist by original training. Yeah.
There you go. So if you don't have that TDI, you're out of business. And this stuff is used everywhere. And of course, even when the bed is finished with and someone buys another bed, and in North America, in the United States, for example, the turnover for bed replacement is about 7 or 8 years. So, and that's how and then they get a new one. So even when you're finished with the bed, even if you were to grind it all up or just stuff it in a hole, those chemicals never go away. You may not see them anymore because they eventually turn to particulate, but they're with us forward in time for generations. And in the case of the fire retardants that have gone into these beds and other household items, the chemicals, these chemicals are actually so embedded in humans now that about 99% of all mother's milk, if it's tested, is found to contain some of these chemicals. So
and even polar bears in the Antarctic.
Yeah, and even though at the time these things were hitting me, my son was past breastfeeding age and was just starting school. I remember my wife feeding my son when he was an infant. And I thought of all the mothers doing that. And the idea that a chemical corporation could insert itself into a woman's body and then into a newborn baby, I found that repugnant as just as a concept, that we tolerate these kinds of things. So that's where it started. So I did decide to design a bed, and I did one, and it was good, but it wasn't good enough. And so I put the idea aside for a few years, and I came back to it in earnest about 2.5 to 3 years ago. And I set out to make a bed that would be very comfortable and would do no harm, as is the doctor's creed, do no harm. And that turned out to be challenging, but we found the right resources and expertise in the different areas and the different materials. And I have to report to you, Ken, in a manner of speaking, we've failed, because 0.2% of the bed still contains some petroleum. But
I noticed that. I noticed that on the website, the elusive 0.2%. But you're working on it, which is, the other good part of the story.
Yes. And so I think if we can do that out of the gate, a small company in Vancouver, Canada, and actually in Deep Cove, which is a little village adjacent to Vancouver, and if we can do that out of the gate, what's the excuse for the entire multi-billion-dollar bedding industry, and indeed any corporation that makes consumer goods for human beings to use? There are no excuses. There's absolutely none that are credible. And so that's why we've made it, because it's needed. And we also want it to be, in addition to being successful and adopted by people, we also want it to be a kind of business case study that these things can be solved. That's a snapshot. And that's where we're starting, and we're just getting underway now, and response is rather good.
So for me, I have, of the last 20 years, 17 of those years, I worked with Bill McDonough and Michael Brongott at, I ran the consulting firm McDonough Brongott Design Chemistry. So we did all the deep dives into many materials from many different, business areas, different product areas. And Michael was one of the early ones who was doing testing of what comes off any product. And he would put a TV set in an environment and sample the air. What happens when a TV set just sits there? What's it off-gassing? And that's sort of what you were referring to with the TDIs in the bed, and that you are there and there's something going on, but you can't see it. And the other, Michael's partner Bill, in the M of MBDC, he would always talk about cost, performance, and aesthetics as being the three main parameters that a designer typically uses and is expected to perform against. Obviously, you've got to try and make it to a price point that you can sell and make a profit on, and the product has to perform. So, and then it also has to look right. And I noticed in some of the materials that you have online, you actually talked about beauty. That's not something that everybody talks about. And so aesthetics can just be, it looks nice. You actually used a specific word, beauty. So tell me a little bit about the beauty of what you, and also some elements of the performance side of the bed you've designed.
Well, on the question of beauty, the poets and the songwriters often address the question, and there's outer beauty and there's inner beauty. And what we've tried to do is imbue our product with both. So we have a very spare and simple design. It's minimalist. What could be new in bed design? I mean, essentially, if you look at all beds, if you put a mattress of any type and put it on a foundation, it's a big rectangular box. I've always thought they look clunky and heavy and bulky. But mind you, I spent some time in Scandinavia, so you get influenced by that. And
yours is very sleek and slim.
Yeah, it's lean, and so that's an appearance thing. That's an outer beauty. But part of the inner beauty of that design is that empty space below the bed, and you with your background with chemistry, you will appreciate that's not empty space. I mean, there's air. And so one of the things in studying sleep, I became aware that we take an average of 6,400 breaths a night. And this is the period of time where we're rejuvenating our bodies and physically, mentally, all of that, and getting recharged for the next day and so on. But you know, the quality of the air you breathe any time of day or night is important. So we designed the bed so there would be room underneath and air can move. Most beds have a massive foundation underneath. Anybody who talks about the bed breathing in that scenario really is you know, talking nonsense. You have to have the ability for air to move. So air can go under that bed, and when that air goes up through the bed, we have a slat suspension system that's double layered and it's extremely open. So air can pass through. And then unusually for beds, our core of our mattress, which is a Dunlop latex, it's only 3 inches thick. And of course, people tend to associate a thicker, deeper bed with more comfort. But then again, I can just remind them of that old fairy tale about the princess and the pea. It didn't matter how the bed was piled up, she could still feel it. So, so really, our suspension system is so responsive. It doesn't just receive the body, it pushes back, and it puts the body and the spine in particular into a good alignment. And we found that when we put a thicker and thicker mattress on it in the testing, it really dulled the performance of the suspension. So we found the sweet spot of having enough padding above it to give a sense of softness and comfort that humans love, but also to give proper support. And then of course, on top of that, latex is a natural wool batting and so on. And another point of beauty would even be the wool batting, because this is how far we've gone. We found a producer in a tiny village in Northern California who has some sheep. And those are the sheep we draw our wool from. And these people practice their shepherding and their production of sheep to the level that it's cruelty-free. So a lot of the listeners wouldn't be familiar with the term museling, where they actually cut the skin around the bottoms of the sheep away, you know, which is quite a cruel thing to do. And that's common practice in the wool industry. But these people take good care of their sheep. And we think that's as important as taking good care of people. So
when it comes to materials like that, a lot of people think, particularly in the fabrics and textile world, people think about maybe organic, but not necessarily the cruelty part. You know, it's a very multifaceted topic that we're talking about, this whole area of sustainability, and now the circular economy, you know, woven into it is becoming more important.
Yes, it is.
But I was particularly struck by that idea that you had actually considered beauty in some depth, because it's often a superficial topic, but for you it was clearly a much deeper, thoughtful topic than just, you know, just the external, how it looks piece.
And even the poets even there, I can't remember the name of the poet now, that he's the guy that came up with the line about beauty being more than skin deep, because I believe his lover, or the woman he was chasing after, drank some chemical and it turned her skin blue, and she said, "I release you from your vow of marriage." And he said something like, "Darling, my love for you is more than skin deep." And so the beauty is outward and the beauty is inside. You know, otherwise it's just decoration.
Right, exactly. Another element you talk about is, in design terms, is the biophilia. Say a little bit more about what biophilia is, than the biophilic elements that you've thought about. I know you talk about the DNA of your materials. Yes.
Well, of course, when people talk about biophilic design, it's almost immediately always associated with architecture. You know, and there's levels of biophilic design. There's an aesthetic where people might bring imagery of the outdoors into the room, into the workplace, into the home. It might be paintings, it might be graphics that are representations of the natural world. There's a deeper
It
level where
starts of a love of nature.
the love of nature, exactly, yes, and expressed in all these different ways. And it can be that lighter version I've just described, or you can go deeper where you try to integrate the natural world into the environments we live in. And we see this in architectural design and bringing plants indoors, a simple thing like that, for example, improving air quality that way. These lovely walls you sometimes see that are just like a garden,
Green walls.
natural light, all the rest of it, running water. And so we've taken it through to the love of nature that we've put into the product, I'm fond of saying nature is the best designer. And I have it on good authority from Aristotle that he felt just the same way. So even 3,000 years ago, or approximately. So I think that's good advice then, and it was good advice then, and I'd say today with climate breakdown, I'd say it's essential advice, because if we don't get right with the natural world, I wonder about the future.
Indeed, and the common thread in my podcast here is and it's called the Circularity Edge, because after a lifetime of working on environmental and sustainability related issues, particularly around products, I knew there was something missing with the way everybody had been dealing with these topics. And fundamentally, that's when I discovered Bill McDonough and Michael Brongart and what they called cradle to cradle design. This idea that nature operates in cycles, and we typically don't. All of our processes are typically linear. We take materials from the earth, we make something from them, we sell and buy products, we use them, and then we throw them away. And that linear flow multiplied millions of times with millions of products, billions of products, and billions of people is giving this stress that you've referred to, under the umbrella of climate change. Because that's clearly one of the most important topics that's been raised. But waste is also an important piece, that we're not using things and not reusing things. And I know just on your site, you talked about borrowing materials from the earth and then returning them safely. Say a little bit more about why that was important to you. Well,
I think the view we have to have is, we sometimes use words like exploit, but I think we have to we have to recognize that we're custodians. We're only here for a short time in the length of real time of the life of the planet. And so, even in our religious past, there's that idea of the good steward. And I think we have to be custodians of these things. And we have to recognize that we're here for a time, and there will be others, our children, for example, their grandchildren, and everybody else's. And if we have a reasonable sense of unity and connection to other people, we have to be respectful of that. So if we're custodians, we can't just, tear, as we do in Canada, tear coarse oil out of tar sands, burn it, and not give a damn how it impacts people on the other side of the planet, and vice versa. I mean, we have to be mindful of that. And so this is why we take the idea we're just borrowers of it, and we must return it. And if we don't return it, it's a failure, and there's a terrible consequence for it.
To me, importantly, you added a word which I think most people miss when they think about just what I would call simple recycling. And the circular economy is much, much more than just simple recycling. You added the word safely, and I think this is why I was particularly intrigued to talk to you. That you mentioned the idea of some of this stewardship coming from the Bible. I mean, of course, in the Bible, it actually says we have dominion over the earth. But a lot of people misunderstand that as if we, like you say, it's just exploitative. But dominion really implies stewardship. But again, I don't think most people see it that way.
Yeah, it doesn't mean I'm the boss of the earth. It means you're responsible. It means you're responsible.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
And
but the return safely, this is where I find a lot of people misunderstand all of these constructs. And this is particularly true, I find, today with the circular economy. You know, a lot of people think it's just recycling on steroids. Oh, okay, we're doing stuff that's bad, therefore we have to reuse it again and recycle it. Well, no, not if you haven't put in the amount of thoughtfulness that you've done in the materials you're choosing, because it's in the material choice at the beginning that determines what you can do with it at the end of the use. And so you've obviously made a lot of use of wood in your design. It's a natural material. It can be grown in a sustaining fashion. Yes, I was talking about the idea that you know, you put a lot of thought into the material choice at the beginning that then enables you to have a safe cycle at the end. The return safely was because you made the effort at the beginning to choose materials that were able to cycle safely. And a lot of people just think, oh, you just recycle things. Well, not if you've made it of stuff, like you said, the TPI and other, whatever else it is you talk about, that doesn't have that ability to cycle safely.
That's right. So it really should be a banned substance, period. But here's the thing, you mentioned recycling, and I have more recently looped back around to recycling, and I have to say, oh, everybody loves to talk about recycling. And I've come to a very negative view about the concept of recycling. And what I recollect, because I'm old enough to recollect it, is we never used to say recycling. We used to talk about the 3 R's, and we spoke about them always in a particular order. And it was number 1, reduce. It was number 2, reuse. And the third and the last item at the bottom of the list was recycling. Well, reduce and reuse seem to have dropped out of the human vocabulary and on an everyday basis. And recycling alone is really a negative because it perpetuates business as usual. I was talking to a guy in Europe a few months ago, and I was asking for his opinion, and he mentioned the Keurig coffee things. And he said, I said, well, how do you feel about that? He said, oh, Len, no problem, they're recyclable. And I thought, you're an idiot. Because that's
this is the difference, right? The difference between potentially able to be, you know, recovered in some way and reused versus is it really? And anybody who's ever been in the back end of a recycling center or a municipal solid waste system knows that those things are too small to even be caught in any machinery, let alone, you know, collected and reaggregated. But you make a good point about the R's, and there are more than just the 3 R's that everybody's conventionally thinking about. And you introduced another one in your design, which is repair. And so you have replaceable parts, and you talked about on the website about the right to repair. And I think this is an important piece too, because the repair cycle, making something have the ability to be usable for longer, is a super important concept inside the circular economy. And like you say, it's higher up the hierarchy than recycling. As you say, recycling should be the last thing you do.
Yes, that's right.
So tell us a little bit about the replaceability elements that you put into your design.
Well, it's replaceability as opposed to planned obsolescence. And of course, when you start to actually have proper thinking about planned obsolescence, what you come to realize is it's a greedy scheme. Because if you make a product cheaply and you plan for it to be purchased and then to be quickly or relatively quickly replaced, then you get sales churn and you can increase your volume of sales. So really, planned obsolescence is a form of exploitation. And that's all it is. And people used to talk about it years ago in the automobile industry, for example, that it was very common. You know, we're never satisfied with what was good 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Something must be new, shinier, and brighter. And that's also part of a well-researched and well-documented way of looking at the infantilization of the adult population of the Western world, where everybody's focused on bread and circus and games and watching Netflix, you know, every night. And binge watching it and all the rest. We still have to think. And so the right to repair that's for thinking people, you know, like you may pay more for an item that is of good quality, but the cost of the utility of it over many years is so much better if you can repair it. And I remember my dad, he brought some of his tools from Britain to Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, all those, he's passed now, but all those years, he had the same tools he had after he got out of the army. He still had the same tools,
Yeah.
you know, in the basement or the garage.
And I still have some of my dad's in exactly the same way. Mm-hmm.
But if you go, we have a big outlet. I guess it'd be like maybe like Pet Boys in the United States. We have Canadian Tire, which is a big hypermarché of home goods and everything from tires to coffee makers and everything else. And you know, you look at those tools and you say, how long is that going to last? You know, you really wonder.
Yeah, some of
So
them
really,
certainly not made to last. What would you say?
Right to replace typical.
What would you say with the ability to repair, and given the choice of materials you've made, what would you say how far have you extended, do you think, that typical use period that you said was 7 or 8 years in the UK for the typical bed, in the US for a typical bed? You know, how much longer do you think your bed can be reused for?
A responsible owner can use the bed all of their life, and then they can pass the bed along. Because, you know, obviously some of the textile components, it's possible they could wear and get damaged. Some of the, you know, and the other thing is everybody sleeps differently. So,
Right.
you know, if someone's a very heavy sleeper, if they live in bed, I suppose it would wear out sooner than if they just went into bed for 7 or 8 hours a night. But you can replace and keep going and just change out a part. And that buttoning system that we've designed for the bed, there's an aesthetic to it that I think is comforting. It's comforting and familiar to see those big knobs. And I realized after I had designed it that way, I thought, gosh, you know, we've got a wooden cabinet in our living room. It's from 1860, and it's an old Quebec pine cabinet. And the big knobs on the chest of drawers part of it, they're almost the same. They almost look exactly the same as they did back in the 19th century. So that it's got beauty, but it's functionality and it's low tech. So a lot of people making a bed that would have a cover come off, I've seen them, they'll use Velcro. Well, we can't use Velcro because Velcro is a poor imitation for a thistle, you know?
Yeah.
So we had to have a simple way to do it that anybody could just but they don't need any tools. They don't need an Allen key from IKEA. They just need to take their fingers and undo the buttons, pop it open, and they could change out the mattress component. They could even change out a piece of the suspension. And therefore, it could go on their whole life. And the frame and the suspension components, there's no reason why they can't last as long as that 1860 cabinet we have at home here.
Right. Makes sense, yeah. So in your opening remarks, you talked about where you live in Deep Cove. Tell us a little bit more about that. I mean, for me, place is very important. When we came on the recording here together, before I actually pressed record, you know, we talked about where each of us came from, and we both have a history in the northwest of England. And it's interesting that we started the conversation that way, because I think place, where you actually are, as well as where you originally came from, is an important piece. You know, for me, all sustainability is local. That if you delivered a bed to me here in Charlottesville, Virginia, the ultimate, you know, use of that is here, not in Vancouver. And so, what is there about Deep Cove that's helped influence your thinking?
Well, you know, I live in a large urban area called Metropolitan Vancouver, but I'm on the North Shore, on the other side of the harbor. And we have coastal mountains here. They're not the Rockies, they're further east of us. But we have these coastal mountains, and they come hard up against the city to the water. And at the end, in North Vancouver, where I live, there's an older community called Deep Cove, which it literally is a crescent-shaped cove that if you go back to the 19th century, they were just clear-cutting all the trees. But the wonderful thing is the forest grew back. And we have some old trees, but we also have quite a good heavy forest here right up against these mountains, because it wasn't suitable being so steep for early development. So it didn't get developed to the same extent as other parts of the city did. And so we have a a body of water here that is colloquially called Indian Arm, which I think the local indigenous population doesn't really like, but that's what the colonizers called it. And it's the most southerly fjord on the Pacific coast. And it is like a Norwegian fjord. It's extremely long and narrow. It's extremely deep. And on either side, it has very, very steep mountains. And that's in, I can walk down to the water in minutes from here, and I can take a canoe and go around there and be there in just minutes. So we have all the amenities of the city, but the place is small, and it's still quiet because it's a dead end. So there's no way to build a highway to go someplace else. And that's helped keep it small. And so it's very easy to get to the woods and to smell the sea air. And we do that regularly because it's part of the lifestyle here. And I realize that is a kind of spiritual nutrient. And a lot of people that live here seem to be of that view. Not everyone, but many.
Well, good.
I guess that's why they settled here. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's obviously, I could tell from taking some time to look at your website that it was an important component. The place where you are has meaning for you, which I think is important for people to think about. What impact are you having on the place where you are doing what you do? And how can we mitigate things?
When it's quiet like this and you can get out into the woods, you get away from all the noise of urban life, and you can think more clearly. I think you can think.
So tell us where people can go to find out more and read more about the things we've been touching on. And
well, they can go to our website, www.horizontal.eco. And that would be nice because we're new and we're building audience. So if anybody wants to visit the site, we're happy to have them, and happy to have them subscribe and comment. Even if they're not buying anything, that's okay. I think for these bigger purchases in one's life, and a bed is a significant purchase, people need to do their investigation and make sure they're making the right choice. And I think for a lot of people, and probably not for everybody, I'm sure, we will be a right choice for many.
Good. Well, thank you very much for spending time with me today. I've really enjoyed it. I've enjoyed not only the story and the thoughtfulness that's gone into your thinking and your design, but also to meet a fellow ex-Brit from the Northwest. Thank you very much, Len, for spending time with us today.
Have a wonderful day.
You've been listening to the Circularity Edge podcast. Be sure to subscribe on iTunes or Google Play to get new, fresh weekly episodes. For more, please follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, or visit our website
at www.circularityedge.com.
Until next time, buy circular.